You are listening to the Big Blue Podcast from the Center for Creativity here at Metro Campus. I'm Greg Stone, and my co-host, as always, is Dr. Lee Goodson, president of TCC. Hello, Lee.
Hello.
And our guest today is Bryan Coppedge. It would help if I got the right page in front of me, Bryan. Dr. Bryan Coppedge, who is our assistant professor of biology at the West Campus. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Having me.
Yeah.
Former associate dean, and now a happy faculty member.
Very happy. Very happy.
Is that how that works?
Generally
That's how it
speaking.
worked for you.
It's how it worked for me.
You
and
can plead the fifth if you'd
Yeah,
like.
yeah, no,
you
that's
know,
good.
I missed the classroom too much, and
Yeah.
it was just time for me to go back.
How long were you associate dean?
11 years.
Okay, I thought
That
it
is
had
a
been quite a while.
long time.
Yeah.
It's a lot of service.
I saw a lot of colleagues come and go during that
Yeah.
stretch.
Yeah, I bet
so.
you did. So,
But we're here today really to talk about your research.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
great. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm always happy to talk about that.
I
yeah,
thought so.
it's so great too. You have such a live classroom. I've had the opportunity to come by and
Yeah.
just really appreciate the engagement you have going on with your students, and that's part of what you're doing with your research.
With the
is
research,
engaging
yeah,
your students.
I was part of a group that several years ago really kind of got interested in this idea of undergraduate research and trying to bring that into TCC. So I know there's a number of other faculty that I've been involved with that, Dinah Spencer and Patty Smith and a lot of others that we really saw that as just another avenue for engaging our students and making science real and practical to them. And so
And
we
is
continue
that-
to push on
and,
that.
And is
so.
that the EPSCoR piece that's brought into
The EPSCoR
TCOR? Can you
piece,
explain
well,
that a little
the
bit?
EPSCoR program, the Oklahoma EPSCoR program is a much larger collaboration between the larger research universities and the state regents to bring in funding to build research infrastructure and capacity within Oklahoma, not only from an educational perspective, but also to hopefully foster economic development as well.
Okay.
So it's a huge program, and it's a huge grant. And the part that I got, the grant that I got was called a Research Opportunity Award, which is targeted specifically at faculty at regional universities and community colleges to build our research capacity, our research experience, so we can then involve our students in that. Because traditionally teaching institutions research isn't a focus, and so they still the goal is to try to push research out even into areas where the overall faculty focus isn't on research.
And for the listeners who may not know what EPSCoR stands for, it's the Oklahoma Experimental Program to Stimulate Competitive Research.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it is generally funded by the National Science Foundation. It's
How
a
exciting is
collaboration
that?
for
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about the project that you were awarded for. What's the project like?
Well, the project I was working on, I've been working several years on native wood-feeding beetles, just looking at sort of their ecological and evolutionary relationships with various hosts. And I saw this grant as an opportunity to get some funding to do some things that were a little beyond my normal research capacity here at the college. And the goal of that specific grant was to build collaborative relationships between faculty at the regional schools and community colleges with colleagues at OU, OSU, TU, the bigger research-focused institutions. So I had a person that I had worked with before that collaborated with me on the project, and we together kind of wrote the grant and submitted it through TCC, and we were awarded. So I spent last summer, not a lot, but making a few trips to Stillwater to do some of the analysis that we were doing to access equipment that I didn't have access here to here.
So how long have you been researching wood beetles?
Oh, a long time. It's what I did my master's degree on about 25 years ago. So off and on. It's not been a consistent project, but I kind of vary in and out of it.
How did you decide? I mean, if you're not involved in research, you may not understand how a research agenda ends up being developed, and it's very organic.
It
You
certainly is, and
you start with something
you
and it leads to
oftentimes
something
just
else.
kind of sometimes in research, especially in ecological research, it's almost more reactive than proactive. As we
Right.
see a problem going on, and we think, why is this problem here? We need to investigate this and figure out what triggered it. Exactly what triggered that. Well, my research is did my master's degree in forest entomology, so I've always been interested in wood feeding beetles or basically anything in the forest that's causing problems. So I had just a personal opportunity. At my home, I noticed one year that there were these oddly cut branches just all over my yard. And I went out and picked them up, and I was just cleaning the yard up, and I thought, this doesn't look right. This isn't just normal trees dropping leaves kinds of things. Something has actually cut these branches off. And so after I started investigating a little bit, I realized, this is the famous twig girdling beetle that I had heard about all these years, but I had never actually seen them. And then all of a sudden, my yard was full of them.
Wow!
So I actually started on the project. Probably that was about 2003, and just had done some real what I call essential fundamental life history kind of research, just looking at how many eggs they were laying and how many offspring were emerging, just some real basic things like that. And then I actually sold that property, moved to another place, and about the same time I noticed down the road from where I live, the city of Sand Springs established this place called the Keystone Ancient Forest Preserve, which is a nature preserve out by Keystone Lake, and I thought, that might be a good place to do research as well. And I collaborated with the city, with the parks director, and he said, yeah, you can go in there anytime you want. So I just go in there, and I've actually had students who have done a couple of projects with me in there, so it's just kind of grown from there.
So that's really the benefit, the research that you're doing. I mean, it's tremendously beneficial, but it translates to that engaged learning in the classroom.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's to take the stuff that we do in the classroom, which is, so often theoretical, and then let's go out and see what it looks like in practice.
Exactly.
And we're in nature, where it's usually a little bit messier than what the ideas are in the lecture. So.
Well, this is the Big Blue podcast from the Center for Creativity at Metro Campus. I'm Greg Stone here with Lee Goodson, and our guest today is Dr. Bryan Coppedge, Assistant Professor of Biology at West Campus. I am an English major, and so I know a lot about diagramming sentences, but very little about wood-feeding beetles in the state. How many are there in the state? I mean, how many types of species, and what are they? Are there?
Nobody.
I mean, you talked about your yard being sort of, ransacked by this particular beetle. I mean, are there sort of bigger ecological issues going on in the state?
Well, I think, in terms of how many are in Oklahoma, nobody really knows. I mean, there's an estimate that there's about 25,000 species in North America alone.
Wow.
Which
That
is,
is a lot.
so that would mean that there's probably at least a few thousand in Oklahoma, and most of the time they go unnoticed. They're not going to cause any issues. It's just on these rare occasions where they cause significant noticeable damage that people notice them. And the impetus behind this grant, with its link to climate change, is what we're seeing all across North America now, as we get harder and more severe droughts, which weaken the trees and weaken their defense systems. We are seeing an influx of a lot of these different kinds of native beetles and exotic beetles that have actually been introduced, attacking our native forests and trees. And so luckily those kinds of systems can recover, but the concern would be that on a long-term basis, as climate continues to change and droughts continue to get worse, there's not going to be that period of recovery that we might see. So overall forest health is a concern that kind of touches upon that.
Is there a part of the state that's being hit more significantly than others right now?
I would say not really right now. I think in terms of strictly in terms of Oklahoma, I think we're in pretty good shape. I mean, our forests are pretty drought adapted already, and that's kind of one of the reasons why this EPSCoR grant was given to Oklahoma, was because our forests they're pretty tough and resilient already. They experience a lot of, wet periods, dry periods, a lot of prolonged drought, and so it makes Oklahoma a good model for the kinds of climate change scenarios we might see as things continue to get worse, bigger, or longer on. So.
That's really interesting, because a couple of years ago I was in Colorado, and I don't know which of the 25,000 species it is, but there's a wood-eating beetle that has worked its way farther down in the Rocky Mountains than usual. So
Probably one of the bark beetles.
Right, I
Yeah.
think it was.
Yeah.
And so there was just a lot of concern. There was a lot of discussion about it. And so that particular type of forest isn't able to adapt.
Well,
How
the
does that
beetles
work?
are there all the time anyway, but when the temperatures stay warm and we don't get the cold temperatures in the winter to kill them off or kind of knock their populations down, then they just continue to
They
build
just
year
keep
after year
going.
after year. And then
Okay.
once they kill these large expanses of trees, now you've got all this fuel. And if it's continued to be hot and dry, you get this
Then you
sort
get
of
the fire.
insect-fire combination, and it just causes
Interesting.
widespread devastation. So yeah, there's some concern. Now, Oklahoma does have the bark beetles. They're mostly in southeastern Oklahoma, so they're not really a problem in the last few years. That doesn't mean they won't become one in the future.
Right.
So
Right.
Yeah.
there's always that concern. So
So you're in your research right now. And
yes.
give us a timeline, and have you had any initial findings?
Yeah, I had some initial findings, and to try to summarize kind of the key that I was getting at with my research, and the reason I needed the ability to analyze wood samples at OSU was I wanted to look at why the beetles do well in some situations and not in others. And my key there, I hypothesized, was the nutritional content of the wood they were feeding on. So to get at that, you have to analyze the chemical composition of the wood, and it takes machinery and equipment to do that. OSU has a great lab over there that can just do it instantaneously.
In Stillwater?
Yeah, in Stillwater, in the ag college.
Oh, so that's
because
in the
it's-
Division of Ag.
Right, it's in the
Okay.
Division of Agriculture, because it's basically the same machine they use to analyze hay samples and forage and that kind of stuff. It basically is looking at nitrogen content. Nitrogen is a good proxy for protein content and that sort of thing. So, yeah, my initial results were exactly what I had predicted, that where the beetles were doing well, the nitrogen levels were elevated, and where they failed, the nitrogen levels were lower. So I'm still working on that. I didn't get as far as I wanted to with my stuff in fall. I want to get into a little bit more detail analysis on the difference between the species of trees and whether there's a connection there to fluctuating nitrogen.
Before we get to the big question, if
Okay.
other faculty members are interested in grant opportunities or funding opportunities through Oklahoma EPSCoR, just go to the EPSCoR website.
Yeah, the
Do you have any-
EPSCoR website has all the information. There are a number of announcements that come out on, especially if they are targeted towards faculty at particular types of institutions like TCC. So probably in February there will be an announcement about the ROA for next year.
Okay.
And so far TCC is 2 for 2 on applications of faculty to that program. So I would say if there's any other faculty that want to apply, work with our grants office, because
Absolutely.
they've got we're
They know
batting
what they're
100
doing.
right
Yeah.
now. So
Who was the first?
the
Was
other
it-
one, I knew you were going to ask me that. She's here at Metro.
was it Valerie O'Brien?
Valerie O'Brien,
Yeah,
thank
okay.
you. I could see
Yeah.
her face, just couldn't get her name out. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So we save this big question for last, and that is, Bryan, if you had the opportunity to give advice to your 18-year-old self coming out of high school, what would that be?
Boy, I thought about this question, and I never could really come up with a perfect answer. I think what I would probably tell myself is just be sure and sample every opportunity that you have in your general education classes, because you may end up finding something that you like better than what you initially thought you were there for.
That is so
That's
true.
true.
I had no intention of going into science. It did not even appeal to me in the slightest.
That is,
What did you want to do?
I actually thought I was going to either go into law enforcement or law and become a lawyer.
Wow.
That was really where I thought I was going
And
to go.
here you are.
And I took a couple of science classes, and I just fell in love with one of them, and I said, oh, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
So find something that you just get up every morning and go, I can't wait to go do this.
Yeah.
Because
do you go out
then-
in the field quite a bit?
Not as much as I'd like, but
That's what I
yes,
hear
I try. I
from
try to avoid it
scientists.
when it's really nasty weather like
Yeah.
this. But oh yeah, especially in the fall. I just wish we didn't have classes in the fall, because I would go out there every day doing something. But but
Noted.
just about every weekend and as many Friday afternoons as I can get away from the office, I do go out and do field
some
research.
field work. Yeah,
That's
great.
great.
Well, it's been great having you here.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
again, thank
absolutely.
you for the engaged learning environment that you provide for our students. I know it's a great experience for them.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for coming that day
Yeah,
last semester.
it's
I
good.
appreciate it.
I'll be
and
by again.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
And thank you all for listening to the Big Blue podcast with Dr. Lee Goodson and me, Greg Stone. And we will see you next time. Thanks for listening.